Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and a happy Halloween, everybody. I know last year we wore costumes and we made this place look spooky. And if you're watching us, that's exactly what you're thinking. And if you're not, then look good. This time I'm going to do it differently. Uh, I'm going to do it for those people who are just our listeners. So we're going to start over again. Don't have to cut it, Randall. We're just going to start right here. No, actually, let's start over again one more time, okay?
All right.
You don't mind, Randall?
Yeah, go ahead.
Welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
The Halloween episode. Okay, so those of you who are watching us and not listening to us, you're going, hey, where's the costumes? Where's the cool background? And I'm like, well, this year it's for our listeners, not our watchers, which is a way of saying we just never really got around to a cool costume or a groovy background. Sorry, we didn't know we'd be here a year later. We thought for certain we would have lost interest or you would have lost interest. But hey, we are glad you're here, right, Randall? So as always, subscribe, like, comment, share, especially this episode because I think you're going to find it very helpful as we are going to pick five Halloween. Each of us are going to pick horror comedies that we think you might enjoy watching, and we're going to do it double feature style, where we're going to pair each of our horror comedies. Randall picks one, I pick one. We pair them together. We talk about the genre of horror comedy. Hey, Randall, before I go any further, what's a good way of reaching out to us?
Well, check out our website, chrisandrandall.com, or check out our Facebook page, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall.
Alrighty, so the horror comedy. Here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to give you 10 horror comedies. We're pairing them up double feature style. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, you'll probably even see links to where you can find these. Normally, you should be able to find most of these either on like YouTube for rent, Amazon for rent, or HBO. Yes, some of these are going to be great for the family, and some of these would be better for the grown. So we'll let you know before we get into it. But horror comedy, right? Randall, do you call it horror comedy or do you call it comedy horror?
I usually like to say horror comedy.
You hear how Jewish I am whenever I say the word horror. It could not be more New York. I'm sorry, I'm going to have you call it. Say the name of the genre, please.
Horror comedy.
Horror comedy. So how does this genre work? We're going to talk about our favorites, especially the ones and especially the ones that some of you do know and some of you don't. And we'll cover some family friends. So comedy, horror, is that how it's pronounced?
Horror?
Horror.
Chris, pronounce it however you like.
We just did a show about South Korean names, and I had an easier time saying their names than saying the word horror. So, okay.
You're saying it fine, Chris. Keep going.
It combines elements of horror and comedy fiction. There's an author named Bruce J. Hallenbach who cites The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving as the first great comedy horror story because the story made readers laugh one moment and scream the next, and its premise was based on mischief typically found during the Halloween holiday. So, although I would never say, did you ever see Tim Burton's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow?
You know what? I don't think I have seen it.
Not that funny. I don't really even think, to say that, oh, that was the first great one. Okay, whatever, maybe, but it's 2021, and like anything, comedy from the 18th century, it doesn't age well sometimes. But comedy horror has been defined into three separate subcategories. So we have what's called black comedy, which is also known as dark humor, and that's where you get humor or comedy from something that is serious. It's also a form of satire that uses irony and mocking. So, needless to say, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is a black comedy, and I think it can be done well, but I think of the three that we're about to mention, it's the hardest to do right. What do you think? Black comedy, dark humor?
Uh, well, yeah, it's the least straightforward, sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's the one that can confuse people the most. It's the
Sure.
equivalent of being sarcastic. Like,
Right.
did you really mean what you mean?
Right.
No, I'm being sarcastic. Then there's parody, and parody takes on recognizable works of and deliberately subverts their original intent by means of exaggeration and irony. And then there's spoof, and spoof is a humorous work of fiction which focuses more on genre conventions and exaggerates them for comic effects. So I don't want you to get too caught up on the difference, which worry about what's a parody or what's a spoof. There's no test on this. But all of the films that we're going to discuss today are going to be either black comedy, a parody, or a spoof. And that's really all you need to know as far as like the genre types.
Yeah, we're just gonna talk about our favorite horror comedies today, right? So
Right.
maybe people could check
Well,
them out if they haven't seen
broken
them.
it up. Yeah, we've broken them up into subcategories, 5 of them. But I just want to say, in general, humor. You said this when we were discussing pre-show, and I wanted why don't you say it again? What is it that both comedy and horror share in common? It was just a
Well,
really
I
astute
think that we both came up with this, but yeah, I mean, I think that they both are trying to explore anxieties and fears we have, both horror and comedy. But comedies, they diffuse those fears with laughter, with something funny, something ridiculous, and then horror, it diffuses those fears with violence usually.
Yeah, and both of them really work on tension and release. So in both genres, you have tension, and then the release in comedy is the humor, and then the release in horror is the violence. And it's interesting because we see a lot of hybrid genres, but I think of all the hybrid genres, these two work almost the easiest together because of the fact that they're both, as you say, they're about anxiety, they're about fear, they're about developing tension, and they're also about, I would argue, exaggeration and emotional. There's a certain kind of emotional realism to exaggeration where, you exaggerate suffering or pain for comedic effect, or you exaggerate absurdity for comedic effect. And in horror, it's the exact same thing, right? You exaggerate pain for dramatic effect, you oddity for, right? There is a sense that everything is painted on a broader brush.
Sure, sure. You wanna get that emotion in there. Make it as emotional as possible for the audience, for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So I think the first one I wanted to pick in our double feature is and it's a staple of comedy more than it's a staple of horror. Is what I call the buddy horror comedy, Randall, which is just a variation of the buddy comedy. So my pick, which is actually probably, according to a lot of film historians, one of the earliest horror comedies, is Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, which came out in 1948. Did you ever see that movie?
Yes, I saw it as a kid. A lot of people think it's one of the funniest movies ever made.
Yeah,
Definitely something to check out.
It is, and now it's an interesting thing because but Abbott and Costello, you should hopefully know Abbott and Costello, where they were a comedy duo. They did a lot of movies, and most of their movies were not monster movies. However, they were produced by Universal Pictures, and Universal did make their money in that same period of time doing all the classic monster movies. So they did Dracula, they did Frankenstein, they did The Wolfman. They had people like Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr. So it was an interesting. It's almost as if at the time Universal was like the Marvel universe, and they had all of these established actors who you knew who played you know, Captain America and Iron Man at the same time. They had Jonah Hill movies where Jonah Hill constantly teams up with, I don't know who Jonah Hill constantly teams up with, but you get my point, I'm hoping. So this one, even though it's called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, is really about Abbott and Costello meeting Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. They play delivery men in Florida who have to deliver these special packages from England to McDougal's House of Horror. And along the way, and I don't want to give too much of the story away because actually it has a pretty solid story. It does, the script actually really works in that it utilizes farcical mistaken identities and Abbott, Lou Costello not believing Bud Abbott. No, I'm sorry, Bud Abbott not believing Lou Costello that he keeps on seeing Count Dracula. But they do, in the process, Count Dracula is in this, played by Bela Lugosi, Frankenstein monster, played by Glenn Strang, and the Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Jr. And in fact, sadly, this film is considered the swan song for the big three because this is the first time those three actors have appeared since House of Dracula, and it would be the last time. Now, Abbott and Costello would go on to meet the Invisible Man, the Creature from the Black Lagoon. They would play this out for quite a while, but this one really works to me the best because there really is all the elements of a good universal horror movie. There's the costumes, the effects. There is the actors who are playing their iconic characters are playing them straight, So
and there's a lot of physical comedy, right? So
a lot of physical comedy,
it's great for
and
kids.
That's interesting because slapstick comedy is funny, but we always forget that there's a lot of violence in comedy, and it's funny violence, and there's a lot of violence in horror movies, and it's scary violence. So, and I really should have looked up the director because the director of this one really did a brilliant job of really finding that midline between the two. This one, folks, is like an hour and about 10 minutes, perfect for small children or all ages. Totally can watch with the whole family. And again, it has romance. It has all the elements that make for a really good Abbott and Costello movie, and all the elements that made for a really good. It's really one of my favorite hybrids in any genre. So let's talk about Zombieland, which is the other film on our marquee for this show.
Well, Zombieland, I mean, I don't want to give out too much information on it. It's just a real fun movie. It's a buddy comedy. It's action comedy. It's got a lot of zombies. Yeah, Jesse Eisenberg's in it, and he plays a character that you're not completely annoyed with the whole movie. You enjoy hanging out with him the whole movie, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, that's true. And in a way, really, it is the repartee between Emma Stone is in it and Hallie Steinfeld, and they are definitely. Emma Stone is definitely the romantic character in it. Hallie Steinfeld is the kid at this point, but it's Woody Harrelson, and it really is the buddy of Woody Harrelson, who's very much the confident cowboy of a Zombieland universe, paired up with this very menschy, right, Jesse Eisenberg, and kind of like Abbott and Costello, right? We're watching so much of the humor in Abbott and Costello, and so much of the humor, didn't you find, in Zombieland is generated off of these characters playing off of each other?
Yeah, I mean the characters in Zombieland are great, not just Jesse Eisenberg, but you'll enjoy all of them. There's a great cameo from a major movie star in it that's really fun. I don't want to give it away. It's just
that's okay. There's a minor cameo from a major horror movie star in Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, and I'm not giving it away either. So
yeah, I mean we pick all these movies, huh?
And it is scary. Zombieland is scary.
Yeah, I mean there's some tense moments in the movie. Yeah, it walks the line between horror and comedy well. It's like there are sequences that are like tense and there's sequences that are funny. So
Now, both of those movies were, in fairness, for their day, at least medium budget films made by the studios, and they could hire anyone they wanted, and they had a lot of money for effects, and it was all really top of the line in casting, in production values, in everything you could possibly do. So let's now go into the reverse, and let's talk about two of our favorite low budget indie horror comedies, Evil Dead 2 and Werewolves Within. Randall, why don't you take it away with Evil Dead 2?
I'll just say that like Evil Dead 2 would be the top of my list for horror comedies. It's at the top of my list. A lot of people consider it like a lot. I mean, not just me, but a lot of people consider it the greatest horror comedy of all time. It's got physical comedy, slapstick comedy. It's got horror. It's got gore. It's got a lot of tense moments, a lot of action, and it's just a lot of fun. You don't have to watch the first Evil Dead to enjoy it. In fact, you might enjoy it more without watching the first Evil Dead, because the first Evil Dead is not.
I've ever seen the first Evil Dead.
Oh, it's great, but the first Evil Dead is not a horror comedy. The first Evil Dead is a horror movie. Evil Dead 2 is a lot faster, a lot more fun.
So it's Sam Raimi, who would go on to do like Spider-Man, and he's doing the new Doctor Strange movie. So are you telling me that the original Evil Dead was just a straight up horror, and then when he made Evil Dead 2, he decided to make a horror comedy?
Yes, and a lot of people were really disappointed. A lot of old Evil Dead fans were really disappointed in Evil Dead 2 because it's a completely different kind of movie. It's not a horror movie anymore.
Oh, wow. And it's Bruce Campbell, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Who is always very funny, Bruce Campbell.
Right. So Evil Dead 2, it really gives you the Bruce Campbell character like fully fleshed out, and that character goes on to be in lots of sequels, a TV show. Yeah, it makes Bruce Campbell basically. So yeah, wow, I mean, if you haven't seen it and you like Bruce Campbell, you like horror comedies, you need to check it out. I can't imagine you haven't seen it if you like Bruce Campbell, though.
It is a really low budget, right?
You know what? It's it's a low budget movie, but
studio was behind it.
You'll never notice.
No one knew who Sam Raimi or Bruce Campbell were.
Right. Well, you'll never notice that it's low budget when you watch it. At least I don't think you will.
Right. But at the same time, like it was not made by a studio, was it? A major studio.
No. I'm looking up who made it. I'm not sure who made it, but it was let's see.
And Bruce Campbell was not a big name at that time either. And while I think the special effects and the makeup are fun and good, and nothing is tacky, there's not a lot of sets. They're working with the limitations, but within the limitations that they're working within, they get great results. It's actually kind of interesting to see that Sam Raimi is directing Doctor Strange 2, where Marvel and Disney will write him like a gigantic check and let him pick any major actor he wants from the Marvel universe. So I'm looking forward to seeing how. I mean, he's good at any budget. Go ahead.
Yeah, Evil Dead 2 was fairly independent, no major production company. Why don't we talk about your low budget indie movie?
Werewolves Within, right? So I just came out 2021. Saw it in the theater with a staggering budget of $6.5 million. It went on to make $989,000 domestically, which is to say, it's probably, weirdly enough, I didn't know this, but it's based on a video game. Did you ever hear the video game? It's made by Red Storm called Werewolves Within. It's Ubisoft.
I haven't heard of it, no.
Yeah, so apparently it's the highest reviewed video game movie ever, which is good. I didn't get the name of the director. I'm sorry. This is very much a low budget movie. It takes place in a snowy part of America where a forest ranger named Finn Wheeler, played by Sam Richardson, who, if you are watching Ted Lasso, played Edwin Afuco, very funny, is assigned to cover Beaverfield, a small town where the residents are divided over a pipeline proposed by businessman Sam Parker. Upon arriving, Finn befriends a mail carrier, Cecily Moore, who, if you've ever seen the more recent Verizon commercials, it's played by Melania Barantrub. I totally ruined that name, but she plays the Verizon commercial, the Verizon girl, in all those Verizon commercials.
She has a big following online. Yeah.
And they meet all the other characters of this town, like Trisha Anderson and her unfaithful husband, Pete, a wealthy couple, Devin and Joaquin Wolfson. So Devin is played by Cheyenne Phillips, who you might know from 30 Rock, and Joaquin Wolfson is played by an actor who is on a TV show we'll get to in a minute. But you have blue collar work with Gwen Marcus and her isolationist boyfriend Emerson Flint. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting the names wrong. But my point is, and I shouldn't be doing that. My bad. Is that the town? It's like a small town with a handful of very satirical characters that have to kind of cluster together while they're in the middle of a snowstorm, knowing that different members want the pipeline, don't want the pipeline, but slowly people are getting knocked off by this mysterious werewolf. And, you know, we're watching this through our hero's eyes. It's tense. The special effects for the werewolf is probably where they put all the money in because it's not cheesy. But the humor, again, that comes from it really does come from the cast, from the actors and the characterization. There is some dark humor as well. But then there's real great moments of tension. Whenever the mauling happens, even though it is humorous and scary at the same time. And it really, you know, it wouldn't have taken much to make this just a straight up werewolf movie. And it really wasn't. I mean, it's funny as it is, you know, I definitely found myself having the traditional scares. And we'll talk about another werewolf movie in a minute, but I do really recommend, if you want to see something new, Werewolves Within. And actually, why not? Let's go further now and talk about what I think is maybe one of the more quintessential ones of this. So, I think really when we think of horror comedies, they're really called classics, and they're both takes on Frankenstein, is Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein and Randall, your pick.
Yeah, the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Right, these are classics. And I know what you're saying. I saw them. I know them. I've seen them literally when they came out in the movie theaters back in the day, because I'm that old. I saw Young Frankenstein in the theater 4 times.
Wow.
Every time it came out. I've seen Rocky Horror Picture Show like 50 times. So, yes, children, there was a time where people would actually have to not stream a movie again and again, but like pay good money.
You've seen Rocky? You've seen Rocky Horror Picture Show 50 times?
Yeah, it took me like a couple of years, but yeah.
I didn't know you'd seen it that many times.
Yeah. So this is what we mean by, so there are takes on Frankenstein, and there's a 1970s, and there was something about, you know, Warhol did a version of Frankenstein that is not very funny, but oh my God, it's so scary. But Frankenstein became a big thing in the 70s. I think all the kids who had grown up with those Universal pictures, you know, they were the big filmmakers and storytellers, and they were coming into their own, and they just wanted to go back to the good old Universal Frankenstein and do their own unique take. So I'll talk about Young Frankenstein first, and then you can talk about Rocky Horror Picture Show. So even though this is a Mel Brooks film, a lot of credit really should be given to Gene Wilder, because Gene Wilder, who was working with Mel Brooks on Young Frankenstein, was working on this script, and he pitched it to Mel, and he said, I was thinking about, you know, what would it be like if Frankenstein had a grandson? Because in the end of the day, do we always end up just working back in the family business? And Mel Brooks thought, this is genius. Literally, as soon as they were filming the last shot of of Blazing Saddles, they got to work on Young Frankenstein. And Young Frankenstein is so reverential as a parody that I'm going to show you what they did. So they shot in black and white. They found Kenneth Strickfaden, who worked on the 1931 film of Frankenstein. You know, all the electronic things that make the doodads go. Mm-hmm. He kept that stuff in his garage in Santa Monica, and it was still working. And then they got John Morris to do a period score. The credit sequences is exactly like they did in that time. They even do dissolve. So just like if you're like a cinema geek like I am, it's so cool to see how many ways that to me, good parody or even a good spoof should be as reverential, should really get those stuff. So like Dale Hennessy designed sets that honored art director Charles D. Hall's original designs for Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. Gerald Hirschfeld supplied the atmosphere's black and white cinematography. It's just on a film level, it has some of the funniest actors of the day. Besides Gene Wilder, you've got Marty Feldman, Peter Boyle as Frankenstein, Madeline Kahn, Terry Garr, Kenneth Mars, Cloris Leachman. So there is literally nobody in this movie who is not working at the top of their game. Is this movie scary? No, it's really not scary. There is maybe one good scary scene, and it's actually with Gene Hackman in it, who has a very small cameo. But I debated a lot, Randall, whether to put this in this because it is a horror comedy, and I thought, well, it captures so much the spirit of Frankenstein movies that even if the comedy is a little bit stronger than the horror, I still think of it as comedy horror because you have to know all the tropes, all the conventions of the Frankenstein story to really get. I mean, you can get it on a whole other level, obviously, but there's a scene where there's a blind man played by Gene Hackman who invites Frankenstein into his home. And the scene is literally almost word for word, for a large portion of it, exactly to the actual scene that they're making fun of in the 1931 Frankenstein. So to me, I would say this is a great one to see with kids. This is a great one if you don't want any gore or savagery. It has a musical number, which originally Mel Brooks didn't want. And Brooks has said about this film, and the last I'll say about it too, is he said, Young Frankenstein is far the best movie I ever made. Not the funniest. Blazing Saddles was the funniest. But hot on his heels would be the producer. Great. But as a writer-director, it's by far my finest. And I actually have to agree. I really do think it is his finest. And in my opinion, it's also his funniest. You've seen it a lot, haven't you, Randall?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, of course.
What's your mini take on it? You like it a lot?
Yeah, I mean it's a fun movie. It's funny. It looks great. The monster is hilarious. Yeah, I mean everybody should check it out for sure.
And it uses a lot of the tropes, just like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So, and by the way, they came out almost identical. This Young Frankenstein comes out in 1974, I believe. Rocky Horror Picture Show comes out in 1975. Anyway, it's your tell us about.
Well, Rocky Horror is. I don't know. It could be the greatest encapsulation of the 70s of all time. It's like Rocky Horror is a movie about a middle American couple's morals being corrupted by hedonism and hedonistic people, and the horror in Rocky Horror is I don't know. What would you say? Lust, maybe.
I think kind of like Young Frankenstein. It knows its conventions well. It's the same idea of people going to a mansion where there is a Frankenstein, and there are narrations, there are servants, and there are oddities, and there are cavernous lairs. So again, it plays all the conventions very well. But you're right. Whereas the Young Frankenstein is really looking at it from a 1930s perspective with a slightly modernistic sensibility. Rocky Horror Picture Show is almost deconstructive with like a rock and roll subversive sensibility.
Well, it's completely subversive to modern American morals. I mean, I don't even think a movie like this could be made today.
I think there's more reverence in Young Frankenstein.
Oh yeah. I mean, Rocky Horror is a fun movie, though. I just want to say, because all these movies I picked are fun. I mean, all these movies are fun. Yeah. It's like Rocky Horror is a musical. It's got a lot of great numbers, costumes. it's a fun movie. I mean, all the performances are fun. It's a movie about sex and sexual mores, and it's probably not suitable for kids. And it's just everybody should see it.
I was 13, so I would say 13 if you're a New York kid.
Well, you were a sophisticated kid.
You're a liberal
from Manhattan.
parent. Yeah, exactly.
You grew up in the 70s, Chris.
Now, if your parents smoke pot and your family uses the FUCK word and watches Saturday Night Live, then yeah, but liberal parents, go see it with your 13-year-old. Non-liberal parents, your kid's just going to be a stoner and watch it talk a lot in college. So, that's and it's very weird too, because Young Frankenstein did become a musical eventually on Broadway, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show actually is older than Young Frankenstein because it originated as a musical on the Broadway West End. So it whatever they were doing back in that early 70s, it was some.
Yeah, Rocky Horror. Rocky Horror, I'd say, fits into the mold of like something like Hair, which it's like it comes out of this questioning of our morals and our sexual relations with each other, and I don't know, that kind of era is over. I feel like AIDS might have killed it.
I mean, Rocky Horror is definitely a boomer story, whereas Young Frankenstein is my parents' generation, which is a silent generation take, and both of them were coming of age in the 70s. So there's a lot that we could have done an entire 1 hour episode on those two movies. So I'm not going to. But when the 80s come, actually, really during the 70s, right through to the 80s, you have two very strong directors. One really known for making some of the most consequential comedies of the late 70s, early 80s, Animal House, Stripes. I don't know about Stripes. Animal House. I should have looked up of his films, but
Blues Brothers.
Help me out here. Blues Brothers. Eventually, would do Coming to America. John Landis worked with all the heavy hitters from Saturday Night Live. Just so subversive, just at the top of his game. And then the other John
Carpenter,
master of horror. Name some of his wonderful works.
Well, let's see. He did Halloween, I believe, and The Mist or The Fog, maybe. Let's see what else.
You did the remake of The Thing.
The Thing in 1982, which is probably one of the all-time great horror movies, probably his greatest movie.
Escape from New York.
Oh, Escape from New York. I love Escape from New York.
So these guys were really so good at this. Now, in 1969, when Landis was working as a PA on Kelly's Heroes in Yugoslavia, he saw some gypsies put a spell on a dead person so that they wouldn't come back to life. And he came up with this idea of doing a werewolf story that was both funny and also scary. And at the time, they felt like no one wanted to make the script because they felt it was too scary for a comedy and too funny for a scary movie. So it languished on his desk until he became the major director he is. And even at that point, like I forgot to mention that Mel Brooks got into trouble because he shot the movie in black and white, and they had to switch studios because one studio didn't want a black and white film. So even though by 1981, Landis, having just done like 3 different blockbusters on his way to doing more, he could do whatever he liked. Even the studio execs at Universal, wanted him to cast Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi as the 2 main leads. And he said, no, I'm going to go with 2 unknowns, David Naughton and Griffin Dunne, who we now know. Anyway, it's about these 2 guys, David Kessler and his buddy Jack Goodman, 2 Americans. They're in the Scottish Highlands. They're in England. Unfortunately, they go to a pub. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but long story short, our leading man, David Kessler, played by David Naughton, becomes a werewolf, and his buddy Jack Goodman, played by Griffin Dunne, becomes his first victim. And David Naughton's character, David Kessler, falls in love with the nurse that takes care of him, played Alex Price, played by Jenny Agutter, who, if you remember, was the female lead in Logan's Run, who had a name in Logan's Run, but I didn't look it up. So you want to look it up while I'm talking, Randall?
All right, her name in Logan's Run. Okay.
So anyway, it's a black comedy. This is a dark comedy. This is not a spoof. This is not a satire. David really does become a werewolf and does and kills a lot of people. And this I saw when I was 15, which is great, but it's brutal. It is dark. It is funny. It's surreal. He keeps on being haunted by his best friend, by Griffin Dunn, who says, dude, you got to start killing yourself because you're a monster. And it does play out. Elmer Bernstein, one of the great composers, does the score. There's a million songs about the movie. But the real crowning
achievement. Her name was Jessica,
movie,
I think, in Logan's Run.
Jessica in Logan's Run is Rick Baker, the makeup artist, the first makeup artist to ever win an Oscar in 1980 for his work in this movie. He does a great job. He and Landis would re-team up again to do Michael Jackson's video Thriller, right? Because I believe Michael Jackson was a humongous fan.
Yeah, Michael Jackson loved this movie. This movie was famous at the time for the makeup effects, which were unbelievable. They spent a lot of time on them.
You'll laugh a little bit. It is definitely a comedy, but it's the opposite of Young Frankenstein, where the horror is much stronger than the comedy. But it really works. And as we had mentioned, Werewolves Within is kind of the offspring of this movie. Werewolf movies really work for me. So then your pick, Randall, was John Carpenter's.
Well, I would pick John Carpenter's They Live. It's a wonderful gem, I think. It's one of my favorite movies. I don't know how much I want to give away. I'd rather you just watch it. It's got like a class consciousness. When Carpenter, John Carpenter, he worked on this movie with Roddy Piper, who was like a wrestler in the WWF, and Roddy Piper contributed a lot to this movie. I mean, Roddy Piper probably could have been a big movie star. I think he had some kind of medical injury at some point, and it cut short his career. But yeah, you watch this movie, you can see this guy could have been a huge star. It's just a fun movie.
You want to just mention the premise at least?
Okay, I don't know. Okay, so it's about
the premise.
It's about some. The characters of this movie are mostly impoverished drifters down on their luck. It's almost it takes place in the 80s, but it feels like some kind of Depression era movie where there's just like workers wandering around the country looking for work. So Roddy Piper, he's like Roddy Piper. He's like this itinerant worker, and he's looking for construction sites to work on, and just through a series of accidents, he finds out that there's a secret society of beings ruling the world, and he tries to stop them.
And that's enough. I don't think you have to say more than that. I mean, I just wanted to let them know, what it is that he does. David Keith's in it as well, briefly.
I feel like this movie is just so much fun, and the idea is so novel. I mean, it's just, I don't know.
It's a satire. It's a satire. Wouldn't you say it's almost social satire?
It's hard to put my finger on it because you can call it a satire, but I'm not sure what it's satirizing.
Well, I think I don't want to give much away, but I think the satirical element that is explored becomes very self-evident very quickly if you watch the movie. And it elevates the film to a higher level. It's a smart movie disguised as a not smart movie is what I want.
I'll just say this, it's one of these movies that takes a conspiracy theory or takes conspiracy theories seriously, and which is always fun.
Yeah.
And it's not to validate any of these conspiracy theories, but it's just fun.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to the last double feature, which is a really 21st century comedy conceit, the mockumentary. Because there's nothing funnier than making a mockumentary that's not a real mockumentary, but makes fun of a mockumentary. Because I could do what they did on The Office and just look directly at the camera. Well, now you can see my forehead. I forgot how Jim Halpern always would do that.
Well, should I
For
talk
those
about?
of you listening, I'm doing a Jim Halpert. So yeah, let's talk about the two. You go first with
Okay,
your
I'll
pick.
go first. So the movie I picked, I don't know if I've had so much fun watching a movie before, honestly. Like, I watched it with my brother and my family on Christmas one year on Netflix, and it was called, this movie's called Trollhunter, and it's a Norwegian movie. And it's a mockumentary about people trying to find real life trolls. And in Norway, Norway, that's where the troll mythology comes from, and the trolls are supposed to be evil creatures that live in the woods. They're malicious. They're not like dwarves or elves or whatever. So there's these people in Trollhunter. They're looking for the trolls, and it's great. You don't know if at the beginning you don't know what's going on. You don't know if they're crazy or there's real trolls or what. And I don't want to reveal it, but it's just fun. It's hilarious. The sense of humor. I mean, I've never seen a movie just work on so many levels before.
Okay, well, I remember when it came out, it made many of the 10 best lists. I definitely want to see it. I love mockumentary because, documentaries are always pretending to be real and a fly on the wall. And of course, documentaries always pretend to be objective. I think we've done a whole show on this, but they're highly subjective. So I like it. And I also like how documentaries are always about how bland, they always take extraordinary things and they make them seem so ordinary. And mockumentaries are great at it. And it also allows us to hear what the characters are really thinking about other people. So I'm going to pick Taika Waititi's 2014, What We Do in the Shadows. Now, to be really clear, there is also a TV series called What We Do in the Shadows. And if we did a thing on horror comedies to watch on TV, or best shows on TV right now that are funny, I would say go watch it. It's brilliant. And there was a short film in 2005 called Interviews with Some Vampires. It was called What We Do in the Shadow, Interviews with Some Vampires, also written and directed by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. Jermaine Clement, you might know from Flight of the Conchords. Forget all of that. I just want to talk about this movie. So, as I said before, this is written by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement, directed by Taika Waititi, who I think gone on to some pretty good stuff. And it stars the two of them along with several other actors. The basic premise is a bunch of vampires, about 4 of them, are flatmates in Wellington, which is a town in New Zealand. And the documentarians are interviewing them. According to Waititi and Clement, the favorite vampire films which they are paying homage to include The Lost Boys, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and An Interview with a Vampire. All of these movies are heavily quoted or referenced in the film, along with many other genre films such as Blade, Twilight, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And it's I think this one is really vaguely scary, as in almost not at all. But what it does do is it does tell there are also witches and there are also werewolves in this movie for fans of those two groups. And I think even a ghost. Double check is and ask, well, what would it be like if different people who had become vampires at different stages in history all had to live together, and there's familiars, and there is a real story. There's actually more story than you should have in a mockumentary, because it's almost similar to almost Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, in that it has such a traditional comedy plot where they get involved in hijinks, there's physical comedy, there's mistaken identity, there is all these different great comedic elements that make for a very solid comedy script. There again, in this one, I would say that in this one, they are satirical characters, and everything else around them is played very normal. The violence in it seems almost absurd and not that scary at all, but it is very funny, and it has great character interplay, and the story is pretty tight and logical, and you can see that what would make for a very good TV series in this. The TV series is very different, but it still has the kernel. It's kind of like you can love Mandalorian and And if you watch Star Wars: The New Hope, you go, oh, different but similar. Does that make sense, Randall?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that there's a lot of jokes, and they all just about work, and it'll have you laughing. It's very funny.
And again, they use the documentary technique. So you have a bunch of documentarians following them around in their occult horror life world, which plays out in a very interesting way. And I won't say more than that. So those were our 10. I know, Randall, you have some honorable mentions. I have one honorable mention. Why don't you go first, and then I will just finish up with my one honorable mention.
Wait, should I just briefly talk about them?
Briefly, yeah.
Okay. Well, all right, I got 5 here. So there's a Japanese movie called One Cut of the Dead, which is it's a fun movie. It's like it's kind of like a puzzle box movie. There's a lot of just watch it. You'll have a good time. There's a movie from the 70s called Eating Raoul, which is Paul Bartel.
That's a great one. I love that. Yeah.
It was a Paul Bartel movie. It's another movie from the 70s that's about the 70s. It's about a guy that hates swingers. Like, I don't even know if there are swingers anymore. I'm sure the swingers will be mad that I said that, but it was big in the 70s. It's a very good movie, very fun. There's a movie, A Bucket of Blood, which is like, I don't know. Everybody always talks about how this could have been one of the greatest movies of all time. Just the story is amazing, except for the ending just kind of blows. But everybody,
they remake The Bucket of Blood.
Yeah, that's what is it? That's a Roger Corman movie.
Yeah.
A Bucket of Blood is like one of Corman's greatest movies. I mean, it's a classic movie about the life of an artist, I guess you could say. It's just it's amazing. This Is the End is another one of my picks.
I love that movie.
It's a fun movie. It's
Edgar Wright.
That's right, Edgar Wright. It's got a lot of big stars in it. It's just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, I'm sorry. I'm getting it confused. Wait, are you talking about the Jonah Hill James Franco movie?
Yeah. This is the James Franco movie, but the one you're talking about.
Right, my bad. Yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, it's not Edgar Wright, but the one you're talking about though is very good too, which is what's that one called?
End of the World.
End of the World. Okay, yeah, it's easy to get those mixed up. But no, they're both great movies. Okay, just watch both of them. And then my last pick would be Society, which is like the great Marxist horror movie from the 80s, which is it's explicitly about class, and it's just no one ever made a movie like this before. They could not release it in the United States because it's too radical, I think, ideologically. But so no one ever made a movie like this before or since.
Oh wow! Well, those are great ones. Hopefully, most of those I think people can stream. I hope almost all of them. But so I'm going to be very clear. I am picking The Witches, but not the 2020 Witches. I'm picking the 1990 version of The Witches. So The Witches is based on a Roald Dahl short story that came out in 1983, also called The Witches, and this one was directed by Nicholas Roeg. So Roald Dahl, you probably know him from Matilda. You know him from, you best know him, of course, from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach. And the thing about Roald Dahl's children's stories is they're all horrors. You know, he only knows how to write really messed up, scary stuff, but he has a dark sense of humor. That's what, you've seen Willy Wonka, haven't you?
Yep, I sure have.
Probably. So all of us know, and I've read his adult work, which is far darker and not as good. But his story about a young boy who ends up being raised by his diabetic aunt, goes to a hotel where there's a meeting of women for the prevention of cruelty to children who turn out to be witches, evil witches. And Nicholas Roeg, who directed one of the scariest movies, if you just want to watch a scary movie, but I warn you, it will scare you. Not funny. It's called Don't Look Back. It stars Donald Sutherland. So Mr. Roeg also did Man Who Fell to Earth, Walkabout. He is a great psychological thriller horror director. So he decided he wanted to do a children's story for his son. And intriguingly enough, when his young son's reaction to the original cut was that it was too scary, he recut the film so that it wouldn't be too scary. And it stars Angelica Houston as the witch. And even though she's beautiful and scary. And when I mean beautiful, I mean that it's just a beautiful performance. And her witch is just so amazing. Uh, Jim Henson's company. It's the last work that Jim Henson would work on for film. So you get to see a lot, if you like Dark Crystal or any of the non-Muppet stuff. This is gorgeous work for the animatronic mice, for the vulgar faces of the witches. You know, just genius. Rowan Atkinson from Mr. Bean and Black Adder is in it, and he's very, very funny. There's a little controversy on this one, only because Dahl's ending of the book, which if you've seen or will see the 2020 version of the Witches, is kind of a bummer, and it ends too much on a downbeat note, and Rogue wanted to end the story on an upbeat note, so he shot both versions for Dahl, and then Dahl was so happy with his version, and then Rogue said, "Yeah, but that's not the version I'm using." So Dahl disowned the film. So when you hear that Dahl disowned this film, don't think it's bad. It actually, I think, better. It's one of the few times. Is it super funny? It's pretty darn funny. I almost put it here. I just didn't really know. I didn't think of it as a hard comedy, and I didn't think we had anything to pair it with. But oh, please, it's on HBO. Please watch it. It's great. Wish I had put it on the list. And that concludes it. Happy Halloween, everybody. Be careful who you get candy from. Please wear a mask over your mask or under your mask. Randall, do you have any Halloween advice?
Nope, just have a good time out there.
Goodbye.